Welcome to another live stream, my friends. Bitcoin saw a nice little rally overnight, but is once again faced with my 4-hour resistance level, which I mentioned in yesterday's stream. We ended up pushing through my 5-minute resistance. However, both my 4-hour resistance levels are still intact. I've actually changed my higher up resistance level, this higher up red box. I have changed it slightly, which reminds me I should actually do the same on my regular 4-hour chart here. Basically just adjusting my resistance slightly by pulling my range fibs. Basically from our new highest point here, since we did have that little fake out above my 93K level. We never invalidated the bearish trend by breaking my 115. However, we did at least set some sort of a higher high here. So even though it never broke through my key resistance, I do still want to pull my fib from there in case we get some sort of a double top formation from those levels. So that's basically why I will be changing this. So now that resistance, since we did push that little bit higher, my resistance now, if we tackle it once again with a nice little pump here, would basically run all the way to about 96.1 thousand at this point. So the bulls do still have a little bit of work to do to convince me that things are bullish. That being said, I have already started taking some profits off my latest short here from basically that same resistance that I was mapping out yesterday, right? Just the fact that we had this little bit of structure here. It's already mapped out on this one. But the fact that we had this low followed by this lower low, that confirmed this as our lower high. So I was mentioning that this 4-hour resistance for this range was actually a little bit higher than what I had mentioned on the 5-minute yesterday. So at this point, it is what it is. We were still at resistance. So when I saw that we were getting a bit of a fake out along basically on the 5-minute, looked like we were starting to get rejected there as well. So that's why I ended up taking a bit of a scalp short. Never even quite hit the 0.5 fib, but just that we started forming some consolidation down here, I did want to make sure I locked something in. So I just took profits on about 10% of my position, another 15 down here if we end up hitting my actual target. And I have actually bumped my stop loss to break even already, just because I don't really trust this trend right now. I was looking at this as more of a scalp at this time because honestly, I do see some strength from the bulls. I don't want to be completely oblivious to that fact, even though I am still just, it's not even that I myself am bearish. I'm just still playing that trend until we confidently break some sort of a range and form some sort of an uptrend. But until that happens, I just have to carry my bearish bias. And although that being said, I can look at the fact that, it does look like we have some strength here. The fact that it looks as well like on the trend master on the 4-hour here, we did recently print this buy signal. One thing to consider with that is it is obviously a lower buy signal. So there is that potential warning here that the trend is shifting to the downside. But that being said, being this is on the 4-hour and this is quite a large range, I think it's still possible that we end up testing closer to our resistance that I was talking about earlier, right? As far as the bigger range. The resistance could actually step in a little bit earlier. If I pull that fib up once again, you can see that we have a potential STUBER fib as well. And that 786 to 886 fib pocket would basically go from about 92.3K up to about 93.4K. And then again, that swing fail pocket is basically from 94.5 up to 96.1. So obviously those levels are still a far ways away from us at this time. And yeah, that's a potential nice move to the upside if we end up retesting those levels as well. Obviously, for those of you who are playing longs and that sort of thing, like I just don't have FOMO at this point, but I'm not saying that there isn't opportunities there. It's just at this point, I'm still favoring the bearish side and looking for those resistance retests rather than trying to FOMO into resistance levels like this. So yeah, there's signs of strength. I just don't want to fight my bearish bias yet. Basically, I just need a little more proof from the bulls before before I have any drastic changes, in my opinion. I would actually feel better if we went a little bit lower first, right? I was talking about this bigger Stuber fib setup just pulled from our lows of this range. If I pull a fib from there, which are current lows of the range, let's just call it 80.5 thousand, up to the top of the range at about 94.5. That purple box basically starts at around 83.5K. That's why I was saying last week that I thought it was quite possible that we end up trending down towards 84K. And I still think that's absolutely possible. It's just that, obviously it doesn't have to happen, for one. And for two, we could end up getting some sort of a bounce before going and testing support of the bigger range. So I would feel a lot better about the price if we could actually come back down to this bigger support level. That's where I would be more interested in looking for long positions rather than these early levels here. But obviously the market doesn't always care what I want or what I think. So it's absolutely possible we carry on to the upside. But I'm still in these two shorts, right? The one that I took this morning from that little bit of a swing fail off that resistance I mentioned yesterday. And I still have 20% of that one running from $92,461.80. I still have a little chunk of that guy running. But obviously I paid myself along the way, right? It's just a small position at this point because I took a bunch of profits on it. But I would rather play the range first and hope for a breakout second, basically. Zooming into the 5 minute, like I said, yeah, obviously we just got this little bit of a swing fail. It's actually nice to kind of zoom into the 5 minute and look at it, right? With this fib pull from where we had topped out here down to our range bottom, just looking at that range there. You guys will remember yesterday's stream, I actually had this smaller fib, right? I actually had something like that outlined. Like I said, that one did end up breaking out. But I was mentioning on stream yesterday that there was this 4-hour resistance just a little bit higher. But when we look at this one on the 5 minute as well, just an obvious swing fail off that level. The fact that we end up testing into that red pocket, into the resistance, and then getting that rejection. And not only that, guys, but actually getting a perfect retest of that level again. You can just see that it's obviously a line of interest where, bigger orders or market makers, whatever, stepping in at that point, basically using some liquidity from this little fake out we had here, people FOMOing into breakouts, people having too tight of stop losses, all that sort of thing. A lot of liquidity that gets grabbed on those kinds of moves. So at that point, just seeing that little bit of a rejection, like I said, we haven't even hit my 0.5 fib target. So either the move hasn't played out yet, or we are seeing strength from the bulls and we're going to front run those targets. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. But like I said, I already took a little profits off that and reduced my risk just because, like I said, I don't if we end up just bouncing from here, I think that would be a sign of strength. The fact that we're not hitting my other targets. So at this point, I just, I have this as a looser stop loss type of a setup. My trade from 92.4K. My stop loss on that is basically just a little bit above this red resistance pocket here as well. So I will lock in some profits on that if we end up breaking this resistance. But other than that, I'm going to remain in that position, that little chunk, the 20% I was talking about. So if this one ends up getting stopped out at break even on the rest of the position, at least I still have some short exposure in case this resistance does turn into something. But I don't really want to take a loss on this position at this point. So that's why I've updated my stop. It was just meant to be a scalp off that level anyways, but it turned into a nice little runner here. So how are you all doing in the market? How is everybody feeling? Are you mega bullish, mega bearish? Don't know what the heck to think. Guys, for those of you who are feeling extremely lost in the market and you want to see just many more examples of how I look at market structure, how I'm pulling Fibonacci's, some of my favorite trade strategies, and Like I was talking about, I was warning about this resistance earlier this morning in my Telegram. So if you want to see more examples of that, more of my thoughts on the market, more of my trade strategies and some of my setups and stuff like that, do yourselves a favor, scan the QR code on the screen, get signed up there. Like I said, just more examples of, how I'm looking at market structure, how I'm pulling my fibs, kind of explaining it along the way, just kind of giving a detailed breakdown of the markets as we go, rather than looking for that copium and hopium and fundamentals and what's in the news and that sort of stuff. Just really looking at the charts for what they are. Because yes, fundamentals do have a time and a place, and they do push the price in certain directions, but trying to trade them is incredibly difficult, especially if you're looking at shorter time frames. When you're looking for entries and targets and that sort of stuff, you just need to be able to understand very basic market structure. And that's why I do keep most of my analysis very simple, you guys. Just basically looking at lower lows in a downtrend, higher highs in an uptrend, looking for those Fibonacci pullbacks, those fib levels, all that sort of stuff, guys. Just keeping it relatively simple, other than obviously my odd strategy, like I talk about the MDX Trend Master and some of those other indicators, how I use them. But for the most part, keeping my analysis very simple, you guys. I just find that the more simple you keep things, the less likely you are to make a bunch of silly mistakes, right? End of the year daily range should be tighter. Looking for a test lower, like I have said. Yeah, I would like to see lower. Honestly, even from a bullish perspective, I would like to see us short-term bearish and come down and test some bigger support levels. I would just feel better about it, because even if we started climbing now, I would just, in the back of my mind, if I were to take a long right now, I would be really questioning whether or not we are going to go and test these levels still. Just the fact that we came so close, right? We came very close here, 84.4. We basically needed to go $1,000 lower, and we would have hit the 786. And I would have felt much better about the trend if we started to reverse and find some signs of life from that level. It's always a little bit tricky when it gets front run a little bit like this. Is it a big sign of strength, or does it just mean that the bearish move isn't done yet? Right? That's what we have to ask ourselves. So it's kind of a tricky spot. Am I looking into Zcash? I can absolutely take a look at Zcash real quick. I got a little pouty with that one when I closed most of my position from this short up here. I was right in the middle of this fib pocket, but after hitting my 0.5 fib target, I did bump up my stop loss a little bit early, got tagged, and then the move carried out and it got cut in half, the price. So a little pissy about that. As far as this type of structure, I see an obvious STUBER that it has already seen a bit of a rejection from. So on this trend, this would have been our last higher high. That's our highest low on the micro trend. Even if you didn't like micro analyzing like that, honestly, that's how I look for STUBER fibs when we see this kind of structure break. That's where I'm basically looking for these retests here. But even if you wanted to look more at that as a high and that as a higher high on this level, either way, we ended up taking out the higher low on the trend. So if we pull a fib from our reversal point down to where the price went, so notice we came right up to that 786 absolutely perfectly. I obviously never traded this because it has not been on my radar, and yeah, never had this mapped out or anything. But just at a quick eyeball, I mean, I could tell that, yeah, this is an obvious STUBER level. The problem is that now it's possible the move has played out already. The fact that we've basically hit the first target, right, very close to the 0.5 fib, I would be, if I was in a short from the 786, I would definitely be locking in some profits there. So at this point, I feel like that's a trade that I have missed at this point. Looking for some sort of a bounce play, on the other hand, if we end up dropping a bunch. Could look for something like this. Because back here we had a bunch of, well, yeah, basically this would have been my last low, lower low, lower high, confirmed lower high. Did we get a STUBER there? We basically did. We came very close to the 786 there, and that's where we got that little pump. So either way, since then we've obviously started this little downtrend because we ended up losing some structure like that, which, so, and guys, here's where I want to explain how that microstructure here that I'm talking about can actually make a big difference, and how some structure can look very similar but just be different enough that you get a very different reaction. Because a lot of people would look at this as, hey, we lost this level, I am going to pull a STUBER fib like this, and oh, I got stopped out, this this strategy is trash. This was never a confirmed high or low on the trend, right? Because back here we had this high, we had a higher high, we had this as our confirmed higher low on the trend until we set this. Then it barely moved, right? Stayed there. But when we got this little change here, that's where we did actually lose our micro lower high on the trend. And that's why I would have taken a stab at this kind of a STUBER fib setup instead. But that being said, like, since we started that little downtrend there, I would expect, if it is going to play out in a healthy manner, that we would come back and retest support of the bigger range, basically. So that's why I would pull my fibs like this. And that 786 fib would come in at around 339 US dollars. The 886 is down at about 320. And then the double bottom swing fail zone is basically from 300 down to 274. So there could still be some further downside, but at least there's potential support down at these levels. So it's not like all hope is lost. I think that it's quite likely, if we did end up testing these support levels, that I think we would get some sort of a bounce. Yeah, Bitcoin, it does look like it wants to climb a little bit. Notice there was a microstructure break on Bitcoin. If we look at kind of the same thing, low, lower, low, confirmed lower high on the micro trend, broken. For those looking for scalp opportunities, then, that actually turned into a little uptrend, right? Just how you can look at this very, very microstructure to really start to understand what's going on. And I'm not saying you're going to trade that kind of structure every time. However, it's nice to understand, like, when you can really zoom in like that and pinpoint where actual structure levels are broken that actually matter versus ones that don't. When you can find those on a very micro level like that, chances are you're going to be able to see it very easily on the bigger on the bigger expanded view when you zoom out a little bit, right? So I understand that it's micro analyzing how I look at charts quite often, but I think there's so much value there. It is actually very simple. It's just really understanding how that structure is forming, basically. Yeah, at this point, MDX ALGO, the long short ratio, you can see that it does look like longs picked up a little bit today, and that's likely why we saw that little bit of a pullback. Either way, on the daily here, you can see that we still have that lower high structure, just that little swing fail above. Let's zoom into the hourly. You can really see where the longs stepped in there. You can see they aggressively stepped in, and that's exactly when we ended up having this sell-off. So as soon as retail is willing to basically long into a breakout, right? Everyone thought that we were breaking out, and everyone started to FOMO long into that resistance. And that is basically what the market makers or large players, whales, whatever, used that FOMO as exit liquidity. That's what you're seeing with this indicator right here. That being said, it's not like all hope is lost or anything like that. I mean, there is obviously potential support. At least Bitcoin has done some sort of the fact that we have been trading sideways here. Basically all weekend we traded sideways. So the fact that we have now broke to the upside and coming back down and retesting it, at least we're coming back down, testing it as support at this point on the lower time frames rather than testing it as resistance again. So it's possible we end up finding a bit of a bottom here. We'll see. I'm not willing to long the market right now, but I am willing to bump up my stop losses on my shorts. Sonic has filled the October liquidation wick, you say? That would be this guy. Must depend what chart you're looking at. On the BloFin chart, it has not filled the gap or filled the wick yet. And I think Binance had crazy wicks on a lot of coins, so I don't know if those ones will fill or not. Maybe that is, maybe those are bear market wicks. Who knows? Yeah, I haven't looked at Sonic ever. This is actually a first, but I would be looking for the same type of thing. If it would basically come down, test this, reclaim this wick as support, or just start closing candle bodies right along this or anything like that, I would be interested in a long position at that point. Same thing I'm looking for on INJ that I was talking about yesterday, AVAX as well, Hype. A lot of altcoins have that look right now. It's kind of interesting that Bitcoin filled its wick a long time ago and continued trading to the downside. So it's possible that altcoins do that same thing, but we'll have to see, obviously. Yeah, that's the thing. In those crazy liquidation events, they will vary exchange to exchange just because that slippage is a little unpredictable, but a swing fail considered a change in structure. Honestly, I have mixed feelings about that. I treat a swing fail more so as a reversal, especially if it's just a wick. If there's actual candle bodies closing above, I'll give a little more credit to it. But again, I would still be looking for that short-term reversal to retest the range, basically. But like in this case for Bitcoin, I assume you're talking about this sort of thing, right? The fact that we would have had our lower high right there, just because this would have been our low, lower low, confirmed lower high, and we obviously broke that, right? We broke it actually a couple of times. That being said, there's a couple of things that I still worry about there. One was obviously we never broke the 115, right? I've talked about that quite a bit. Another thing would be a diagonal resistance line played out absolutely perfect, as in some sort of a rising wedge being a possible thing. So either way, respected that as well. So basically, my theory is this. I still consider these swing fails to be bearish just because we haven't ended up actually smashing through my 115. However, that's also why I've been talking about wanting some sort of a hedge long, or still looking at playing these as buy levels, just because we do have that at least. So I'm at least willing to consider it. It's a little bit risky. It's a little bit risky either way. So if it's not perfect, then if anything, I mean, my longs from down here will likely be smaller than my shorts have been, for example. But I would still be looking at trying to play that because, yeah, in this case, we did technically break above. We also lost that uptrend, right? But yeah, swing fails, treating them as new structure. I mean, as far as STUBER fibs, I will still consider playing them. Even if it was just a wick above kind of a thing, I will still consider playing that pullback. So sometimes I'll play it from both sides, right? If I end up, let's say that I'm still in my short from up here because it was a swing fail, and if I can get myself into laddering into a long position down here, get an average entry somewhere in here or whatever, then at that point I would be playing the same range from both sides and just kind of taking profits as it moves around and getting rid of risk and that sort of thing. Hopefully that kind of answered your question, Kool-Aid. It's a tricky one, considering swing fails. I don't really consider it a change in structure, but I still consider a potential trade setup. I guess that's a good way to explain it. Anyways, my friends, I think that's about all I wanted to go over today. So one last time, if you appreciate these live streams, please do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Just a reminder for those of you who are interested in learning and seeing more examples of some of my favorite trade strategies, how I use Fibonacci's and market structure, give more of my thoughts on the markets in general. Do yourselves a favor and scan the QR code on the screen to gain access to my Telegram channel. And with that, I'm out. Stay safe, my friends. Thank you so much for watching once again. Appreciate each and every one of you guys who continues to join my live streams. And for those of you leaving for the holidays or anything like that, catch up soon. Enjoy your holidays. I will still be streaming tomorrow, and then I'll probably have a few days off, but I'll be streaming tomorrow. So hopefully catch you guys tomorrow. With that, I'm out. Stay safe.